There are places in this world where the line between safety and savagery is nothing more than a thin metal barrier, where instinct overpowers intelligence, where one wrong move, one moment of overconfidence, can turn a routine day into a nightmare written in blood. Bangkok, Thailand, a city of golden temples and bustling streets, where millions live in controlled chaos, where traffic never sleeps, and the scent of street food mingles with exhaust fumes and incense from countless shrines. But on one ordinary afternoon, behind the gates of a wildlife park on the city's outskirts, something went terribly, horrifically wrong. A man who had spent years caring for predators, who believed he understood their nature, who thought he had earned their trust through dedication and time, would learn the cruelest lesson of all. That respect is not the same as trust. That familiarity breeds not just contempt, but catastrophe. And that when you enter the domain of apex predators, you don't just risk your life. You surrender it to forces beyond your control. This is the story of a fatal mistake. A story of roaring silence before the storm. Of a zookeeper who crossed a line he should never have approached. And of the lions who reminded him, in the most brutal way possible, that nature does not forgive our arrogance. What you're about to hear is not just a tragedy, it's a warning. A message written in blood and regret, echoing through the cages and across the years to come. Because every time we think we've conquered the wild, every time we believe we've tamed what cannot be tamed, every time we let routine dull our survival instincts, nature finds a way to remind us. And the reminder is always brutal, always final, always too late to matter. The sun was high over Bangkok that day, casting long shadows through the imported acacia trees of the safari park. Families moved through the entrance gates with cameras and cotton candy, children pressing their eager faces against car windows, hoping for a glimpse of the big cats lounging in the oppressive heat. Tour guides spoke in cheerful tones about conservation and biodiversity, and the importance of protecting endangered species. Vendors sold overpriced souvenirs near the entrance plaza. Ice cream melted faster than children could eat it. Laughter echoed across the parking lot. Parents wiped sweat from their faces and checked their phones. It was just another day, just another Tuesday in paradise. Except it wasn't, because deep inside the lion enclosure, far from the laughing crowds and clicking cameras and air-conditioned gift shops, a man was about to make a choice that would cost him everything he had, everything he was, everything he would ever be. He didn't know it yet. The sun still felt warm on his weathered face. His radio still crackled with routine chatter and mundane updates. Everything seemed normal, ordinary, safe, predictable. But the lions knew something he didn't. They always know. His name was Manop Kamta, 41 years old, a father of two beautiful children who adored him, a husband to a woman named Anjali who had stood by him through lean years and better ones, through struggles and small victories, through every challenge their marriage had faced. A man who had devoted nearly 2 decades of his life to working with animals, who had sacrificed higher-paying jobs and easier careers because he believed in something more important than money or comfort or prestige. He believed in purpose, in connection, in the sacred responsibility of caring for creatures that couldn't care for themselves. That depended entirely on human compassion for their survival in a world that had little space left for them. He wasn't a rookie fresh out of training with more enthusiasm than sense. He wasn't reckless by reputation, or careless by nature, or stupid by any measure. His supervisors called him reliable, dependable, the kind of employee you could count on. His colleagues called him experienced, knowledgeable, someone you wanted on your team. His family called him dedicated, passionate, someone who truly cared about his work. But somewhere along the way, between the thousands of feedings and the countless enclosure checks, between the years of routine and repetition and sameness, the mundane rhythm had made him comfortable. And comfort when dealing with predators is the first whisper of death, the first crack in the armor, the beginning of the end. Manop had grown up in a small village north of Bangkok, in the rural province of Nakhon Sawan, where his family raised chickens and grew rice in flooded paddies that turned brilliant golden under the monsoon sun. Life was simple there, predictable, governed by seasons and weather and the rhythm of planting and harvest. Animals were part of daily existence, woven into the fabric of life. Buffalo pulled plows through thick mud. Dogs barked at strangers approaching the house. Chickens scattered when children ran through the yard playing games and causing chaos. But not dangerous ones. Not the kind that could tear flesh from bone with a single swipe. Not the kind that haunted dreams. Not the kind that appeared in his imagination, majestic and terrifying, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. He had always been fascinated by wildlife, spending hours as a boy watching documentaries about African savannas and dense jungle ecosystems on the single television his village shared in the community center. While other boys his age kicked soccer balls in the dirt roads and climbed mango trees and got into trouble, Manop sat cross-legged in front of that flickering screen, mesmerized by lions taking down wildebeest in clouds of dust, by elephants marching across endless dusty plains, by the raw beauty of survival in its purest, most unforgiving form. His dream wasn't to be a doctor or an engineer, prestigious paths his parents had desperately hoped he'd follow to lift the family out of poverty and bring honor to their name. It was simpler in concept, more complicated in execution. He wanted to be close to the animals he admired from afar. He wanted to understand them, to touch them, to exist in their world, even if only at the edges, to bridge the impossible gap between human and wild. When he was 23, fresh out of technical school with a certificate in animal husbandry and veterinary assistance, Manop moved to Bangkok with nothing but a worn backpack 500 baht in his pocket, and a letter of recommendation from a university professor who had recognized something special in the quiet village boy who asked better questions than most graduate students ever thought to ask. The city swallowed him whole at first, chewed him up, and nearly spit him out. The noise was overwhelming and constant. The crowds were suffocating. The indifference was crushing to his rural soul. He slept in a cheap boarding house with paper-thin walls where he could hear everything from violent arguments to intimate moments to crying babies. He ate instant noodles for weeks on end until the taste made him sick. He got lost on the complex bus system repeatedly. He nearly gave up a dozen times in those first brutal months. But he didn't quit, couldn't quit, because the dream burned too bright inside him, because giving up would mean returning home a failure, because the animals were waiting. He started at the bottom of the safari park's rigid hierarchy, cleaning enclosures before dawn when the air was still relatively cool, and the animals were just waking to face another day in captivity. He hauled heavy bags of feed in the brutal afternoon heat that made his shirt stick to his back with sweat and salt. He scrubbed down holding pens that reeked of urine and decay and death, that made him gag violently at first until his nose adjusted to the assault. It was grunt work, humbling work, the kind that breaks most people within weeks, that sends them running back to air-conditioned offices and clean hands and normal lives. But he didn't complain, not once, not even to himself in the quiet moments before sleep, because every single day brought him closer to the creatures he loved, with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He would pause during his rounds leaning against chain-link fences, watching through the mesh as tigers paced their territories with deadly predatory grace as bears wrestled in mock combat. That was half play and half dominance display, as lions stretched in the dappled sunlight filtering through carefully placed acacia trees. And over time, through persistence and patience and proving himself day after day after day, he earned the trust of his supervisors who controlled his fate. They saw his dedication written clearly in early arrivals and late departures. His willingness to work double shifts when someone called in sick or simply didn't show up. His gentle way with even the most aggressive animals. The calm energy he somehow projected that seemed to soothe troubled creatures. His ability to stay calm when others panicked, to think clearly when chaos erupted around him. These qualities are rare in any field, valuable beyond measure, essential in a place where one moment of panic can lead to disaster and death. Eventually, after 3 years of proving himself in every possible way, after every supervisor knew his name and trusted his judgment, he was promoted to animal handler with better pay and more responsibility, then senior keeper after another 2 years of exemplary performance. And finally, after another 5 years of perfect service and additional specialized training, he was assigned to the big cat section, the crown jewel of the park, the assignment that every keeper wanted but few were qualified to receive, the position that required not just skill but temperament, not just knowledge but instinct, not just courage but wisdom. Lions, tigers, leopards. These weren't just animals to Manop. They represented everything he had worked for since leaving his village. Everything he had sacrificed. They were magnificent, powerful, beautiful, dangerous, perfect in their deadly efficiency, living embodiments of nature's raw power concentrated into fur and muscle and bone. He studied their behavior obsessively, reading every book he could find in libraries and online forums. He watched training videos frame by frame, analyzing every movement. He attended workshops and seminars whenever they were offered, sometimes paying out of his own meager pocket. He learned their moods, their complex hierarchies, the subtle shifts in body language that signaled aggression or contentment or curiosity or fear. He could tell when a lion was irritated just by the flick of its tail, the angle of its ears, the way it held its massive head. He knew which tigers preferred shade and which basked contentedly in the midday heat. He understood that the female leopard in Enclosure 7 was fiercely protective of her territory and needed extra space during feeding times, or she would lash out with deadly claws. He documented everything meticulously in notebooks that eventually filled an entire shelf in his small apartment. His colleagues admired him openly and sought his advice. His supervisors trusted him with responsibilities far beyond his pay grade, asking his opinion on medical decisions and complex behavioral issues. His family was finally proud, understanding at last why he had chosen this difficult and dangerous path. And Manop, for the first time in his life, felt like he had found his true purpose, his place in the world, the thing he was meant to do, the reason he existed. But there was something else growing inside him during those successful years, something quieter than pride, more insidious than confidence, more dangerous than any predator he faced daily. It was a toxic blend of familiarity and complacency, not the healthy kind of confidence that comes from experience tempered with constant respect, but the deadly kind that comes from repetition without consequence, from doing the same task 100 times, 1,000 times, 10,000 times without incident, from believing that because nothing bad had happened yet in all those years, nothing bad ever would, from thinking that he was somehow different, special, protected, that the normal rules did not quite apply to someone with his level of experience and deep connection to the animals. He had entered the enclosures before, many times over the years, dozens of times, maybe hundreds if he counted honestly, always with strict protocol in the beginning, back when he was new and afraid, always with backup standing ready at the gate, always with caution flowing through every decision and movement. But lately, over the past year or so, he had started to bend the rules, just a little, just enough to save time in a busy schedule, just enough to avoid the bureaucratic hassle of coordinating schedules and finding a second keeper who was available, just enough to prove to himself, and maybe to others who were watching, that he was different, that he understood these animals in a way others didn't and never would, that the bond he had carefully built over years meant something real, something protective, something that would keep him safe. The safari park where Manop worked was a popular tourist attraction, sprawling across 75 acres on the outskirts of Bangkok, near the province border where the city gave way to farmland and patches of remaining forest. It was designed as a drive-through experience modeled after the famous African game reserves that wealthy tourists visited, where visitors could stay safely inside their air-conditioned vehicles and watch lions, tigers, zebras, giraffes, and bears roam in large semi-natural enclosures designed by landscape architects to mimic their native habitats as closely as captivity allowed. The concept was thrilling for tourists who wanted adventure without real risk, danger without actual consequences, dangerous animals just meters away, separated only by the carefully maintained illusion of openness and freedom. But the illusion was carefully controlled by engineering and vigilance, high fences, some electrified with enough voltage to deter but not kill, secure gates with multiple fail-safes and electronic locks that required codes, strict rules posted at every entrance in 3 languages, and above all, highly trained staff who understood at a bone-deep level that these animals were not pets. They were not domesticated. They were not safe. They were predators, killers by evolutionary design and by instinct, wild hearts beating in captive bodies, beautiful but deadly, majestic but merciless. The lion enclosure was the largest and most impressive section of the park, covering nearly 15 acres of carefully maintained grassland artificial rock formations, sculpted by artists to look natural, and scattered acacia trees, imported at tremendous expense, to create an authentic savanna feel. It housed a pride of 6 African lions, acquired from a reputable breeding program in South Africa 8 years earlier, when the park first opened to great fanfare. 3 males in their physical prime, 3 females with cunning and experience, magnificent creatures with golden coats that shimmered in the tropical sun like liquid metal, and eyes that burned with ancient fire, amber and unblinking and impossibly old. The males were massive, each weighing over 400 pounds of pure muscle, with thick dark manes that looked like crowns of shadow. These were not the lazy, docile cats that visitors imagined from cartoon movies and children's books. These were hunters, survivors, animals whose ancestors had ruled the African savannas for millions of years, whose genetic memory stretched back through countless generations of kills and conquests, of starvation and plenty, of territorial wars and breeding rights earned in blood and violence. And though they were born in captivity, fed on schedule by humans, and monitored constantly by veterinarians with advanced degrees, their instincts remained sharp as glass, razor sharp, honed by millions of years of evolution that couldn't be erased by a few generations of captivity, waiting beneath the surface of domesticated routine for the right moment to emerge, for the opportunity to express what they truly were. Manop had worked with this specific pride for over 5 years. He knew their individual names by heart, knew their distinct personalities, as well as he knew his own children's quirks and preferences. Simba, the dominant male with the distinctive scar across his left shoulder from a violent fight with his brother years ago. Nala, the oldest and wisest female who preferred the shade and rarely played, who had successfully raised 2 litters of cubs. Kovu, the younger male who was always testing boundaries, always challenging, always looking for weakness in the hierarchy. Sarabai, the middle female who was the best hunter during feeding practice sessions. Kiara, the youngest female who still retained some playfulness. And Mufasa, the oldest male who was slowly losing dominance but still commanded respect through experience. He knew their scars, their preferences, their quirks and peculiarities and individual behaviors. He knew which male was truly dominant, and which female was the most aggressive during feeding times when competition brought out their true nature and stripped away any pretense of calm. He had watched cubs grow into powerful adults over the years. He had treated injuries with the veterinary team, administered medicine, monitored their health through good seasons and bad, through illnesses and recoveries and setbacks. In his mind, built carefully through years of daily interaction and careful observation, he had a relationship with them, a bond forged in routine and familiarity and mutual recognition. He spoke to them during his rounds in a soft, gentle voice. He recognized their individual vocalizations, could tell them apart even when he couldn't see them clearly. He believed with absolute certainty that they recognized him in return, that they distinguished him from other keepers, that he meant something to them beyond just another human in a uniform. But that was his fatal mistake, the crack in his logic that would widen into a chasm. Because lions don't bond with humans the way humans bond with each other, or even with domestic animals like dogs. They tolerate our presence. They recognize patterns and routines. They associate certain people with food, or with being left alone, or with medical treatment they dislike. But they do not love. They do not form emotional attachments. They do not feel gratitude or loyalty or friendship. And they certainly do not forget what they are, what we are. what the relationship truly is beneath all our human projections and romantic notions. To a lion, a human is just another animal, smaller, weaker, slower, softer, made of meat. And when circumstances align just right, when hunger or instinct or opportunity or perceived threat presents itself, a human becomes something even simpler. Prey. There had been warnings over the months, small ones that should have been alarm bells, incidents that should have raised red flags but were dismissed as anomalies, filed away in reports that nobody read closely enough or took seriously enough. A few months earlier, during the routine morning feeding when meat was distributed through secure chutes, one of the younger males had charged violently at a keeper who was working near the fence line. The lion had come incredibly fast, a blur of muscle and fury accelerating from rest to full speed in seconds, stopping just short of the barrier with an impact that rattled the chain link and made the keeper's heart stop. The keeper had stumbled backward, adrenaline flooding his system, heart hammering, but laughed it off afterward to mask his terror. Just nerves, he told his colleagues in the break room. Just the cat testing boundaries, seeing what he could get away with. Boys will be boys, even lion boys. Everyone chuckled nervously and moved on with their day. Then there was the time a female had fixated on a maintenance worker who was repairing a section of damaged fence inside the enclosure perimeter. The worker had proper authorization and protocol strictly required the lions to be secured in a separate holding area during any maintenance work. But somehow, through human error or mechanical failure or simple bad luck, one female had remained in the main enclosure. She stalked him with slow, deliberate steps, body low to the ground, tail twitching rhythmically, eyes locked on his movements with intense predatory focus. The worker, absorbed in his welding task with his protective mask down, noticed only when his partner shouted a frantic warning. He looked up to see the lioness 30 feet away and closing steadily. He backed toward the gate slowly, never turning his back, heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst through his chest, and made it to safety with the lioness still watching, still tracking, still wanting. Again, nothing actually happened. The worker was badly shaken but physically unharmed, so nothing was truly learned beyond a vague reminder to double-check the holding area locks. The incident report was filed. The fence was fixed. Life continued its normal rhythm. Manop himself had experienced close calls, moments that should have shaken him to his very core, but instead somehow reinforced his dangerous confidence, confirming his mistaken belief that he had a special connection. Once, while checking a water trough inside the enclosure during an early morning shift when the air was still relatively cool, he had turned around from his inspection work to find one of the males, Simba, standing less than 10 feet away, staring at him with unblinking intensity. For a moment that stretched into eternity, time froze completely. The world condensed to just two beings, man and lion, predator and prey, the oldest relationship in nature. Manop's heart hammered against his ribs like it wanted to escape his body. His mouth went instantly dry. His palms began to sweat despite the cool air. Every cell in his body screamed danger with the voice of a million ancestors who had faced this exact scenario on ancient plains. But he forced himself to remain calm through sheer willpower. He had been trained for this exact situation. Never run. Running triggers the chase instinct that cannot be resisted. Never turn your back. That's an invitation to attack. Never show fear. They can smell it, sense it, use it against you. He backed toward the gate slowly, carefully, each step measured and controlled, despite every instinct screaming at him to bolt. He maintained eye contact, speaking in low, soothing tones using the same voice he always used during feeding times. The lion didn't move, just watched, assessed, head slightly tilted, ears forward, tail still, calculating, and eventually, after what felt like hours but was probably 30 or 40 seconds, Manop reached the gate and exited through the narrow opening. He pulled it closed and locked it with hands shaking so badly he could barely work the mechanism. The lion had yawned, showing teeth the size of daggers, and walked away as if nothing had happened. As if the encounter meant absolutely nothing, Afterward, sitting in the break room with shaking hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that he couldn't taste through the adrenaline, Manop told himself it was fine. Everything was fine. The lion was just curious, just checking, just investigating something slightly out of routine. There was no real danger. If Simba had wanted to attack, he would have. Lions don't hesitate when they decide to strike. The fact that nothing happened proved that the lion recognized him, respected the relationship they had built over years of daily interaction, understood that Manop was not a threat or prey, but something else. Something special. Something protected. But deep down, in a place he didn't want to examine too closely because it frightened him more than he could admit, Manop knew the truth. He had been assessed, measured, evaluated as potential prey. The lion had run complex calculations in his predator brain: distance, speed, threat level, energy cost versus reward. And for reasons only the lion understood, reasons that had absolutely nothing to do with respect or recognition or relationship, he had been allowed to leave. Maybe Simba wasn't hungry, his belly still full from the previous night's feeding. Maybe the distance was wrong, too close for a proper stalk. Maybe some instinct had said not yet, not now, not worth it. But Manop didn't want to think about those possibilities, so he pushed them down into the dark corners of his mind and went back to work. Still, the warnings went unheeded. The incidents piled up in reports and memories, each one rationalized away with comfortable explanations. Because that's what humans do. We are masters of self-deception. We explain away danger until it's crouching over us with jaws wide. We ignore the whispers until they become screams. The day it happened was a Tuesday in late March. The weather was typical for the season, hot and humid, with temperatures climbing toward 95 degrees by midday. The sky was a washed-out blue, cloudless and bright, the sun a merciless white disk. Unremarkable in every way except one. Manop was scheduled to perform a routine inspection of the lion enclosure. The task was simple and straightforward, something he had done dozens of times before without any incident. Check the water systems to ensure they were functioning properly and delivering adequate flow to all drinking stations. Inspect the gates and fences for any signs of damage, rust, or structural weakness. Look for any behavioral changes in the animals that might indicate illness or stress or injury. Normally, this would be done from outside the enclosure, using designated observation points and the security camera system that provided multiple angles and close-up views. But one of the water pumps had malfunctioned overnight, triggering a low-pressure alarm, and the backup system was showing reduced pressure that suggested a more serious problem than a simple blockage. Manop decided it would be faster and more efficient to enter the enclosure and inspect the pump directly, rather than wait for the maintenance team to arrive, which could take hours given their busy schedule and other priorities. He could identify the problem quickly, call in the right parts, and have it fixed by end of day. Simple, efficient. He radioed his supervisor, a veteran keeper named Somchai who had been with the park for over 20 years and had seen everything there was to see. The supervisor hesitated when Manop explained his plan. Protocol was absolutely clear on this point. Any entry into a predator enclosure required at least 2 keepers, with one acting as a lookout and ready to intervene in case of emergency. No exceptions. This rule had been written in response to fatal incidents at other facilities, at other parks where keepers had died horrible deaths. But Manop insisted it would only take a few minutes. 5 at most. Maybe 10 if the problem was complicated. The lions had been fed an hour earlier and were calm, most of them resting in the shade, digesting their meals as they always did. He had done quick inspections before without incident. He knew these animals. He understood their rhythms and patterns. He would be careful, in and out, quick and clean. Quick and... Somchai, trusting Manop's extensive experience and wanting to avoid the hassle and delay of pulling another keeper from their assigned duties during a busy day, gave reluctant approval. "Just be quick," he said over the radio, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty. "In and out. And keep your radio on at all times. If anything feels wrong, even slightly wrong, you leave immediately. Understood?" Manop acknowledged and signed off. That approval, given in good faith by a tired supervisor on a busy day, given with trust built over years of reliable service, was a death sentence waiting to be carried out. Manop gathered his equipment from the supply shed. A radio clipped to his belt, a small toolkit with wrenches and diagnostic meters, a canteen of water because the heat was oppressive. He walked to the enclosure's service entrance, a reinforced steel gate designed for staff access, separate from the main visitor areas and hidden behind a maintenance building. He punched in the security code, numbers he had memorized years ago. The lock disengaged with a heavy click. He pulled the gate open. He stepped inside. He closed the gate behind him. The sound of the lock re-engaging was solid and final. The air inside was different, thick with the scent of earth and animal musk. The lions were scattered across the enclosure. 2 females under a tree. 1 male on a rock. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening. Manop moved toward the pump. His boots crunched on dry grass. He reached it and knelt down. The problem was obvious. A deteriorated valve seal. He made notes. Behind him, Kovu stood up. Slowly, silently. He stretched. His eyes never left Manop. He took 1 step forward, then another. His paws made no sound. Manop felt it, that ancient warning. He turned his head, saw Kovu, 15 feet away, crouched, eyes locked, every muscle coiled. Time became strange. Manop tried to stand. And that movement was the trigger. Kovu lunged. 400 pounds exploded across the distance. Manop tried to run, but you cannot outrun a lion. The animal hit him from behind, jaws clamping down on his shoulder with crushing force. Manop screamed, a sound that tore through the silence, raw and primal. He went down hard. His radio flew from his belt. Then the others came. Nala, Simba, Sarabi. Within seconds, 4 lions were on him. This is what lions do. They hunt cooperatively. Teeth sank into his leg, his arm. His world became nothing but pain. Blood pooled beneath him, his vision blurred. His radio crackled. A voice asking for a status update. But Manop couldn't answer. His screams turned to gasps. The lions continued. They weren't being vicious. They were simply being lions. Back at the office, security guard Prasert glanced at the monitors. Too much movement in the lion enclosure. He zoomed in. His blood ran cold. A person on the ground, surrounded by lions. He grabbed the emergency alarm and pulled it. Sirens wailed. A response team assembled. 6 keepers, including Somchai, whose face had gone pale. They grabbed rifles, reached the gate in 3 minutes. Through the fence they could see Manop's body. 4 lions around him, blood everywhere. Wichai fired warning shots. The lions scattered. Except Kovu. He stood over Manop's body. More shots. Finally Kovu retreated. The keepers entered, reached Manop. He wasn't moving, wasn't breathing. His body was torn. Massive wounds covered him. Paramedics arrived. Started CPR. Applied bandages. Started an IV. But they knew. After 10 minutes, the senior paramedic sat back, shook his head. There's nothing more we can do. He's gone. Manop Kamta was pronounced dead at the scene at 1437, March 22nd. He was 41 years old, a father, a husband, a dedicated keeper who had loved animals his entire life. The news spread like wildfire, television, social media, international headlines. The park closed. Police investigated. Reporters gathered. Public reaction was divided. Some mourned. Others questioned. The lions became focal points of debate. But the lions had done nothing wrong. No malice, just instinct. They were what they were. His wife Anjali spoke through tears. His children asked impossible questions. The funeral was held 4 days later. Hundreds attended, but nothing could bring him back. The park implemented new protocols, mandatory 2-person entry, enhanced training, additional cameras, but none of it could undo what happened. Somchai resigned in shame. He couldn't live with the guilt. The lions remained in their enclosure. After evaluation, experts determined they hadn't become abnormally aggressive. Destroying them would serve no purpose. so they lived. They still live there today. They still bask in the sun. They remember nothing of that day, but Manop's family will remember forever, and so should we. Because Manop's death was not just a tragedy. It was a lesson, a brutal reminder that no matter how close we get, no matter how much we think we know, no matter how many years we spend believing we've built some kind of relationship, we are never truly safe. Not with lions, not with predators, not with nature itself. The wild cannot be tamed by familiarity, cannot be conquered by confidence, cannot be made safe by routine. The distance between safety and death is measured in a single moment, a single choice, a single mistake. And when that distance collapses, the result is always the same. Blood, death, regret. The gates are open again now. The park operates. Every keeper carries Manop's story. A ghost in the grass, a whisper in the wind, a warning that should never be forgotten. Because the next time someone thinks they can bend the rules, the next time someone believes they're the exception, the lions will be waiting, patient, silent, ready, and nature, indifferent and eternal, will have the final word.